Hello everyone and welcome to the Regal Draft League post-draft show. Yeah, mouthful that. Today we will be covering all 14 teams and every Pokemon drafted. I will also be giving you my own personal power rankings as we go through. So grab yourself some tea and biscuits, get comfy, because this is going to be a long one. But don't worry, there will be timestamps in the description. So if there's a particular team you want to look at, watch the intro, then jump on ahead. Don't worry about missing the rankings because my entire ranking sheet will be at the end, so you can even skip to that too. First of all, I want to go over what I look for in building a VGC team, so you can understand why I value some picks a little bit higher than others, and why I've ranked some teams higher or lower than you may have. Let's start by what I think are the important things to have in a VGC team. Let's kind of do that in order of importance. So the number one thing I always look for when building a team, and the single most important thing for me in a doubles battle, is speed control. The ability to dictate the pace of the game. If you're always acting first, then you're putting even more pressure on your opponent, forcing them to react to try and take back control. And if they're reacting, they're not putting any pressure on you. It doesn't always have to be Tailwind or Trick Room. Those are probably the first things you think of when you think of speed control. But you can also have things like Icy Wind, Thunder Wave, any move that raises your speed or lowers the speed of your opponents can work just as well. Number 2 on my list, offense. Getting off the damage. In a perfect composition, you're going to want physical sweepers and special sweepers. This, when it comes to actual competition, is so that you don't get hard walled by things like Intimidate or Burns on the physical side. It's a little more difficult on the special side, but there are moves like Snarl that can reduce your special attack. But balancing your offense will always give you counters and options. Number 3, defense. Now, the best defense is usually a good offense, but you still need to ensure that your defensive typings are on point and you have the right defensive items. Things like Focus Sash, Berries, Assault Vest, Leftovers. Making sure that you've got the right items on your mons to allow them to pivot around. And then on top of this, you look at things like Screens, Intimidate, Wisps, Snarl, anything that will make your team receive less damage. Number 4 is disruption. What can you do to put a wrench into your opponent's plans? So this can be something like redirection, so that they're not hitting the target that they want to hit. It can be status effects like paralysis, sleep, confusion. It can even be crazy tech things like Encore Disable. So you use something like a Scream Tail to encore your opponent into a move that they don't want to use over and over again. Or you can encore them into a move that they do to then disable it the next turn. But you have to ensure that these disruptor Pokemon also contribute to other areas of the team. It's no good having, for example, an Encore Disable Mon that doesn't also do some damage or give your team a defensive pivot. Once it's done its thing, it becomes a liability to the team. So, with these 4 points in mind, let's start ripping my team to pieces. First, let's go over the rules of the draft. The entire Pokédex was split up into tiers: S, A, B, C, D. And you had to draft 1 S tier, 1 A tier, 2 B, 2 C, and a D. But then you were given 100 points to spend on 4 additional free agent Pokemon. S tier Mons were 50 points, A tier 35, B 25, C 15, and D 10. So you could spend those 100 points however you liked, but you had to take 4 free agents. And this is what I ended up with. I had the 4th pick in the draft. Tornadus was still on the board. I wasn't about to let probably the best support Pokemon in the game pass me by. So I had to completely rethink on the fly. By the time my 2nd pick rolled around, Garchomp was off the board. So I decided if I can't have one really cool dragon, I'd have another. So I went with Baxcalibur. With it being a snake draft, I ended up picking again very, very quickly. So I snagged myself an Abomasnow. That way, Baxcalibur becomes even more chunky and I can invest a bit more in his speed. By the time my 4th pick rolled around, I'd already kind of decided I wanted to draft a little bit of a fun option. And Dozo was still there. So, with my 4th and 5th picks, I took Dozo Tatsu because, of course, Tornadus has every single weather. So, if I want to, I can put Dozo in the rain. On top of that, Syrian Bravery gets access to Hurricane, which of course becomes 100% accurate in the rain. I've been using a lot of Gardevoir on ladder recently. Gardevoir is actually a very, very good Trick Room setter. So if I don't want to go with Torn as my speed control, I can go with Gardevoir. I can use Dondozo on his own under Trick Room. Syrian Bravery is slow enough to work under Trick Room. Baxcalibur, if you put a speed reducing nature on him, works in Trick Room. Then came Mesprit. Mesprit covers a little bit for ground weakness because Mesprit has Levitate. Mesprit is also a good Trick Room setter, has pretty good defensive stats and pretty good offensive stats, and also gets access to Blizzard. So Mesprit works in the Trick Room mode, Mesprit works in the Snow mode. Now, I was lacking a little bit in defensive coverage. I was lacking a little bit in my defensive support as well. So I decided Toxicroak. Toxicroak I have used a little bit in the past. If built right, in Tailwind, Toxicroak can very easily one-shot Fluttermane with a Poison Jab. Toxicroak also gets Fake Out, so it becomes a pretty nice defensive pivot and an extra bit of Glass Cannon offense. Jumpluff is a very, very good redirection. Now, in this team, we're highly unlikely to be taking advantage of Jumpluff's ability because they activate in the sun. One of the things I've always struggled with Amoonguss is how slow and how passive a Pokemon it is. Jumpluff can be right on it. Yes, the sleep powders aren't 100% accurate, but they're going first. It has access to things like Encore. It has access still to Pollen Puff, to Rage Powder. It also gets access to Tailwind. It's a far more proactive Pokemon than Amoonguss. And the last piece of the defensive puzzle, I felt like I needed an Intimidator. Yes, I've got quite a bit of bulk there in Baxcalibur, Abomasnow, Dondozo. I've got access to Aurora Veil from Abomasnow to help reduce that incoming damage. But there's a few teams out there that are, as you will see, very loaded in the physical attack department. So I went with Marblestiff. Marblestiff is pretty slow, but it's got a stab crunch, which can lower defenses. It's got intimidate. It's got snarl. It's got taunt. It's a slow, bulky, irritating to remove defensive pivot for me. And that is the team. I'm not going to give away too much of the other tech that's involved in it, but I'm pretty happy with this, and I think a lot of people are kind of sleeping on this squad a little bit.
Okay, analyst hat back on. Let's have an unbiased look at my team, and then we will use this as the starting point for our power rankings. First thing when I look at this team is Dozo Tatsu. Dozo Tatsu in draft is going to be very, very easy to counter. So going to need pretty creative team building and preparation to make the standard Dozo Tatsu work. The rest of the team's pretty solid. Toxic Croak is a very good pickup, I think. Jump Pluff as well is one of the best lower tier redirection mons. Abomasnow's a bit of a weird one, but it does give you access to Aurora Veil, which is light screen reflect in one. So providing they don't have weather control that can take that snow away on turn one, you're gonna get that screen up. Unfortunately, Abomasnow is usually a sash hog because it's fairly slow. If you want it to survive and potentially output a bit of damage later on, you're going to need to give it a sash, or you're going to need to sacrifice some of that damage to give it some extra bulk. Gardevoir is a good utility pick. It deals a surprising amount of damage. It's also a pretty good Imprison Trick Room mon. So for those matches, it's pretty quick. It's going to outspeed the majority of threats on those teams that might take it out before it can get up in prison. Then Mesprit, I feel, doesn't quite fit in terms of the role it plays. It's got some decent coverage. It deals decent damage. Same with Hisuian Braviary. It's a bit of a weird one. It's on the slower end. It can deal a fair amount of damage. It also has access to Tailwind. It's a bit odd, but it's also not the worst. Overall, as a standard VGC squad, it's not too bad. As a draft league squad, it's not the best. So we have our benchmark. The way this is going to work now is that from now on, we're going to be comparing each team we look at to Woobats to see whether it goes above or below, because I do feel like this is a very middle of the road team for the league. It's not the best, it's not the worst, and we will go in draft pick order. So the first team we're going to look at is the New York Latios. And the New York Latios had the very first pick in the draft, and quite rightly they picked the best Pokemon of this generation, Fluttermane. Subsequent picks, however, not so great. Salamence, good pick. You don't always have to go with fast Tailwind, especially if you've got a fast Pokemon alongside your Tailwind setter. So on that turn one, Fluttermane is generally going to go first. So you have your Tailwind setter be bulky enough to take a potential double up, get off the Tailwind, still have some HP there, so that subsequent turns it can output some damage of its own and probably outspeed the opposition. So Salamence with Intimidate, Tailwind, good coverage. Salamence, very good pick. Aquatauros is a little bit of an odd one. I'm used to seeing Fire Tauros. Fire Tauros is a decent mon with decent coverage plus Intimidate. Then Aquatauros, decent mon, decent coverage, Intimidate. Tinkaton. Tinkaton is one of my favorite Pokemon. I love the design. It's underrated. It's one of those that It's not the bulkiest, it's not the fastest, it doesn't output as much damage as you want, but it's annoying. It gets access to things like Feint and Fake Out and Gigaton Hammer, even with a minimal amount of attack investment, can one-shot anything with a steel weakness. Of course, it also gets access to Play Rough as a stab, so I think good pickup, very good pickup. Delphox, it's not great. It's not got the best defensive typing in Fire and Sidekick. It doesn't have an amazing move pool, but it does give you screens, Will-O-Wisp, Imprison Trick Room. So it's a decent utility mon, but it's frail to go with that poor defensive typing. I'm not imagining this is going to be coming all that often. Golduck. Golduck is very underrated Pokemon. It hits a lot harder than you think. It's got excellent coverage. It's got Swift Swim, so if you can get the rain up, it's going to outspeed a lot of things. And then on top of that, for those other weather matchups, its other ability, Cloud 9, stops the weather effects. It's a good counter pick that offensively can take some teams by surprise. It then also gets things like Taunt, Encore, Disable, Yawn. It can be a good support mon as well. Good pick. Go Goat. This pick will have surprised quite a few people, but it's a Pokemon I looked at as well. It's a very, very good D tier pickup. It is pure grass type, so it's going to struggle in quite a few matchups, but it does have rock coverage, fairy coverage, ground coverage, and it's got better stats than you'd think. If you run it in Trick Room, it's going to be great. It gets Sap Sipper, so it's immune to other grass type moves, and if you hit it with a grass move, it gains +1 attack. Dunsparce is a pick that I don't get. I see a lot of people raving about this Pokemon, and a lot of people really like this Pokemon, but for me, I'm not a fan. Its ability, Serene Grace, is pretty good. That can make it a really annoying to deal with support Pokemon. But Rattled, you're going to have to try and proc it yourself. In draft, anyone doing their prep correctly, they're not going to be firing Bug, Dark, or Ghost type attacks. They're not going to bring an Intimidator, or they're not going to switch in an Intimidator when Dunsparce is on the field. So in draft, it's going to be really hard to get Rattled going. Serene Grace, however, when you combine it with something like Air Slash has got 30% chance to make the target flinch. With Serene Grace, that becomes a 60% chance to make the target flinch. Serene Grace is a very good ability, and I'm glad it's on really bad Pokemon. Grumpig and Bellibolt. Now, Bellibolt is an annoying Pokemon to go against. I've gone up against it quite a few times on ladder, and I always struggle to get it off the field. Because it's quite slow, and it's going to take a hit before it fires off something like a discharge. That discharge is always going to be hitting a lot harder than you'd think. Grumpig, on the other hand, is another one that I don't really know a lot about. So let's take a look. What does Grumpig do? It's a special attacker. It's got thick fat. It's got gluttony, own tempo. So gluttony is quite a useful one. It gets really decent coverage. It gets Taunt. It gets T-Wave. It gets Trick Room. So stat-wise, it's not great. Moveset-wise, it's pretty good. It's bulky on the special end. Middling speed tier, which means it can work in and out of Trick Room. Special attack's not amazing. It's not bad either. Yeah, it's a decent lower tier pick. And then, of course, with the one we've completely skipped over, Tinglu. So this team has ended up with possibly the best offensive Pokemon in the game and possibly the best defensive Pokemon in the game. For me, though, they haven't surrounded those two with the best supporting cast. Outside of Salamence, I don't see what this team really brings to the table. So for me, this goes below the Woobats. Just with Fluttermane, Tinglu, Salamence alone, it's going to pick up some wins through the season, but I don't see it being a threat in the postseason without some good trades throughout the season to move some pieces around and to reinforce that core. Next up, we have the Orlando Oshawatts, the team run by League President Otter. Now, this seems a threat. It's kind of one-dimensional, but it's saying, this is what we could do, stop us. It is a Sunroom team with some other tech thrown onto it. Indeed, Armrouge, Lilligant, Torkoal, that's going to do damage. You throw in a Sneasler, which with Unburden from Psychic Terrain becomes the fastest thing on the field. You're getting Trick Room up. For matches where perhaps you don't want Trick Room or you don't want Trick Room up straight away, you've got Crocodile as a good defensive pivot. It's got Intimidate, it's got access to Snarl. It can reduce the damage that its partner is taking on the physical and special side. And then on top of that, it's got some pretty good coverage as well. Vaporeon with the Water Absorb is going to make it so that your opponent isn't going to want to come in with big spread water moves. So it's going to be a nice defensive partner for Torkoal, for Armrouge. It also gets access to Haze, Yawn, Icy Wind. It can manually set up the sun. It's a good pick. It's an all-around good pick. Mismagius, evolving from Misdreavus, which of course is the non-Paradox Fluttermane. It's got some amazing coverage. It's got some amazing support moves. It's got Levitate, which makes it immune to ground, which with the right defensive terrestrialization can make it have almost no weaknesses. Shout out Ionos and her Electric Terror, Mismagius. Then you get down to the last three picks. Barrage is a weird one. If you want a low tier physical Trick Room sweeper, it's hard to overlook something that gets Sheer Force plus a Stab Iron Head to deal with all those fairy types. It also gets Fissure, Bulldoze. It's not something I would have gone for personally, but I can see the thought process behind it. Frostmoth. Now, Frostmoth is odd one. Its ability Shield Dust makes it immune to the secondary effects, so it can't be flinched, it can't be faked out. It's not the bulkiest, but it's not frail either. So it's a middle of the road, slower tailwind setter. It also gets access to Wide Guard, Aurora Veil, Icy Wind. It's a decent enough utility mon. I think there were better picks there. Dene. Dene is strange. It's like a really bad Pachirisu. It's got pretty much the same move pool as Pachirisu, but without Follow Me. And its ability Cheek Pouch means that when it eats berry, and that can be when it eats something like a citrus berry, it gets an extra 1/3 of its max HP. So it's going to eat a citrus berry and it's going to go pretty much back to full health. It does get Super Fang, so it's good for chipping down bulky opposition mons. And it does get access to Parabolic Charge, which deals damage and heals it. So it's going to be an annoying Pokemon to remove. Again, I think there were better D tier picks than that one. Overall, this is one of the better teams in the league. It's a little bit one-dimensional for me. Sunroom with Lilligant, Torkoal, Indeedee Armrouge, it's always going to be a nightmare matchup for anyone. So for me, it's probably one of the top 3 teams in the league. We'll see just how that plays out as we go through, but it's definitely going near the top. Next up, we have Fluffo and the Gothenburg Gothitelles. Now, this is another one that I think kind of failed to capitalize on some very, very good early round picks. The first 2 mons on this graphic Rillaboom, Heatran, they need no introduction. They need no explanation. You put those two on the field and many, many teams are going to really struggle to remove them. You add into that mix a Zapdos, which is a particularly bulky Tailwind setter, which can also output quite a good amount of damage. You have a really solid core of 3. Gastrodon is a really good pivot and is going to provide a really good matchup into teams like my own, into teams that rely on those high damage single target water moves. You just swap in a Gastrodon, it draws in Surging Strikes from Urshifu, it raises its special attack by 1, it completely invalidates that Pokemon and forces your opponent to switch. You've then got a Alolan Muck, which is always going to be tough to remove, and it's got a lot of coverage. So with this being Draft League, in your prep, you can build that Muck to be a good counter into any matchup. It being poison and dark typing it's not bad. It's not bad defensive coverage. And then you've got its ability Power of Alchemy, which means that whatever Mon faints next to it, Muck gets that Mon's ability. So you can put it next to Gastrodon and Muck then gets the Storm Drain ability. You can put it next to Medicham and it then gets Pure Power. That's going to be a very, very tough Pokemon for anyone to prepare for. Mimikyu, it's impossible to one-shot a Mimikyu from full health because of the disguise ability. It's a very good support Pokemon. It's a good Trick Room setter because it can't get faked out being part Ghost type. It gets things like Taunt, T-Wave, Will-O-Wisp. It gets Copycat, which can make it really, really annoying. So for me, those top 5 plus Zapdos they're a very, very good solid core. And for me, although the power level with this at first glance doesn't quite look as good as a team like the Oshawatts, for me this team's got a little bit more versatility, which puts it slightly ahead. What lets this team down a little bit though are the last 5 picks. Medicham is a gimmick mon, and in Draft League, especially in a Draft League like this where you're on a best of 3, you've either got to save that gimmick you've either got to win your game 1 and then have that gimmick get you the 2-0 victory, or you've got to use that gimmick to get you that first win and have the team set up in such a way that you're not reliant on that gimmick to pick up the second win for you. Obviously with access to fake out, screens, taunt, it can be a Trick Room setter. Medicham's not bad Pokemon by any means, and that Pure Power ability is going to make sure that it's a support mon that can deal damage. I just think it's going to be there, it's going to be gimmicky, and I'm not a fan. Berserker was actually a Pokemon that I looked at as one of my lower tier picks. It's a pure steel type, so it's going to struggle defensively, but it's got fake out, it's got taunt, and it's got an ability that means that its contact moves 1.3 times damage. And this thing has a lot of coverage. So moves like Steel Claw, Iron Head, through its ability, those stab steel moves almost hit the same power as if you were terrestrialized steel, but it also means that those coverage moves, something like a poison jab, hit almost as hard as if it was a steel poison type. So it's a very good Pokemon. Hydreigon, this is a tough one because it's a predominantly special attacker that doesn't get a lot of coverage on the special side. It's almost as if this Pokemon was designed to be either a decent coverage physical attacker or a special attacking support, and it's ended up being not great at either. Squawkabilly is a pretty decent, probably overlooked low tier pick. It's an Intimidate mon that also gets Tailwind, Taunt, it gets Parting Shot, it also gets Final Gambit. On the flip side of that, it also gets Guts, which even though it doesn't get a great deal of coverage, Guts boosted stab moves are going to deal a lot of damage even if they're resisted. So as a low tier pick, I like Squawkabilly. It's not one I would have gone for, but it adds some options to the team, which I like. Inteleon. Now, Inteleon always seems to be a bit of a fan favourite, but for me, it's not great. A special attacker that only really has a lot of ice moves and Dark Pulse as coverage. It does get screens, it does get Icy Wind, so it could be a support Pokemon, but it's frail as hell. It's going to need your Sash. I've always found it to be a little bit weaker in terms of damage output than I've wanted it to be. I understand it being a low tier pick. You need a fast special attacker to go in there. It gives you that option, but I probably would have looked at drafting a faster special attacker earlier, maybe instead of Hydreigon. Overall, a very good, solid team that I think sits as high, if not higher, than the Oshawatts, just because of flexibility it's got. I think the damage output on this team is lower than the Oshawatts, but its versatility means it can give opponents a different look in every match. So in terms of a best of 3 that we have, I think it's probably going to be a little bit more successful played correctly. For now, I'm going to put it above the Oshawatts. I just like the fact that it's got Rillaboom Heatran with the option to go either Tailwind or Trick Room. Muck is really, really annoying to remove. Zapdos can deal a lot of damage. Gastrodon is a phenomenal defensive Pokemon. 4th pick in the draft was me. So we're on to pick number 5, the Blazing Brelooms. And this team has somehow ended up with Urshifu, Talonflame, Cresselia. It's insane. This team is insane. You've got the highest damage physical attacker there's ever been in Urshifu, along with one of the best Tailwind setters there's ever been in Talonflame. You've got really fast Spore in Breloom, good redirection in Pachirisu. Cresselia is bulky as hell and can output decent damage as well as healing, as well as giving you a Trick Room mode. Hariyama is, in my opinion, one of the best Trick Room sweepers out there. Slowking gives you the option of a Snow mode plus Trick Room. Then you've got Beartic to take advantage of said Snow mode with its Slush Rush ability and really good coverage. Bisharp is often overlooked this generation because it's now got a final evolution in King Gambit, but it's still got really good coverage and it's still a good Pokemon before King Gambit came along. Haxorus, being pure dragon type, it's going to need Terra, but it's got really good coverage and it's got a surprisingly high base attack. Haunter provides you with a ghost option along with really good support. It gets Haze, Taunt, Encore, Wisp, Skill Swap. It's surprisingly fast. It's got a surprisingly high special attack with Levitate, bit like Miss Magius. If you terror it right, it's got next to no weaknesses. Overall, an incredibly good draft. And I'll just say it now. I think this is the best team in the league. I really do think this is the best team in the league. Probably 8 games out of 10, you're going to go with the fast mode with Urshifu, Talonflame, Breloom. But having the options there to use Cresselia, Hariyama with Fake Out, Trick Room, then the Flame Orb kicks in to give Hariyama its Guts boost. Hariyama also gets access to Wide Guard. To me, controversial incoming, to me, Hariyama is better than Ursaluna, simply because while the damage output is a little bit less, it brings that utility to the table. It can be on the field to help set Trick Room up, unlike Ursaluna. Ursaluna is just going to sit there, click Protect, get its Flame Orb, then go to town. Hariyama can actually Fake Out to make sure that the Trick Room goes up, or Wide Guard to make sure that the Trick Room goes up, and then its Flame Orb kicks in. I prefer Hariyama over Ursaluna on my Trick Room teams. I like the versatility with this squad, and I think it was drafted a little better than the Gothitelles. It's got more versatility than the Oshawatts, or should I say, it's got more consistent versatility than the Oshawatts. The Oshawatts has got versatility. It doesn't have to go with the Sunroom mode. That alternate mode, that plan B, isn't as powerful as the plan B with, say, the Gothitelles. Definitely isn't as strong as that plan B of the Brelooms. And for that alone, the Brelooms, to me, are the strongest team in the league, by far. With pick number 6 in the draft, we had Feathers and the LA Latias. Now, we had some laughs with this in the Discord, but I'm going to straight up say now, this team's wasted potential. You've got a really good Trick Room core in Farigarath, Iron Hands. You've got Pinchurchin to have that automatic terrain, but Pinchurchin does nothing else other than that terrain. You'd almost be better off putting electric terrain on your Iron Bundle if you wanted electric terrain that badly. Now, the electric terrain does give you the option to have the speed boost on bundle while it's running choice specs, which allows you to give bundle that little bit more bulk and stay in power. You've got a decent tailwind setter in Noivern. You've also got a fairly bulky tailwind setter in Iron Jugulus. But the combo of Mudsdale, Orthworm, I've never been the biggest Orthworm fan. It just doesn't do enough for me. It's another one of those Iron Defense body press mons, but it has a bit more team synergy than most of the other Iron Defense body press mons, in that it can use Shed Tail. So you can Shed Tail out next to a Pinchurchin, get Bundle in, Bundle gets your speed boost, it's got choice specs, it's then behind a substitute. But then if you're left with just Orthworm or Orthworm plus Mudsdale, it's not really going to help you win the game beyond that. I don't know, it's not the way I like to play the game, so I guess I don't see a lot of the possibilities in Pokemon like that. For me, I also don't like the idea of taking a pre-evolution like Morgrem. If we look at Morgrem, people would be like, oh wait, you can put the Eviolite on it, it's going to give it extra bulk, it's going to be able to stay there longer. Let's look at Eviolite. Let's look what Eviolite does. 1.5 times on your defense and special defense. Half of 45 by Pokemon round down rules is 22. So you've now given Morgrem 22 defense. Even if you go 252, you're still only giving Morgrem 43 extra HP. You could have taken him on that already had 70 or 80. Come back to Jugulus. An Iron Jugulus already has almost the same base defense. Noivern already has almost the same base defense. You can now put a decent item on those rather than having a Morgrem who, yeah, sure, gets you prankster screens, gets you parting shot, taunt, T-wave, fake out, but it's going to do that and instantly die. You're not going to get up both screens. And even if you do this, you've now got 0 offensive output, not great defenses. You're going to get 1 screen up and die. For me, the pre-evolutions are a waste of a pick. Poltergeist. Poltergeist is another kind of gimmick mon for me. It's a decent support. It's got Trick Room, it's got Wisp, it's also got screens, but it doesn't have a lot of coverage. So most people play this for the Shell Smash Baton Pass stuff, where you can lower something like an Iron Hands. It's already bulky. You can lower their defense and special defense by 1, but then raise its attack and speed by 2. So it's going to have those kind of gimmicks. In a best of 3, open terror sheet, you're probably not going to be able to get that gimmick off consistently enough to make it worth running. Quillfish. Quillfish isn't bad. Quillfish has Swift Swim, Intimidate. It's now got access to Eviolite and will probably be a fairly decent user of Eviolite because it's got a slightly higher base defense than the Morgrem, but it's still got quite a low stat line. It does have Intimidate, it does have Haze and Taunt and Icy Wind, so if played correctly and EV'd correctly, can probably do a bit more for you than Morgrem could. It's a decent lower tier pick. Overall, this isn't a bad team. I don't like a few of the picks on it, but that's got probably just as much to do with my preferred play style versus the quality of the Pokemon. Mudsdale Orthworm, while not as powerful as the Tinglu Orthworm that you've used to see run in tournaments and on ladder, it's still a pretty good alternative to that combination. I like the Fun Pinchurchin pick to give you that electric terrain for Bundle, for Hands, for Jugulus. For Rigraff, for me, is one of the best Pokemon in the game right now on ladder. On ladder, you see so much priority around. For Rigraff is an amazing counter to that. In draft, I'm not sure how valuable a pick it is, but it's still a good pick that I was looking at myself as well. Noivern, I like Noivern. So outside of the Poltergeist, Quillfish, Morgrem picks, I think this isn't a bad team at all. I wouldn't put it above the Woobats. Is it better than the sister team of the Latios? No, I don't think so. So for now, this goes bottom. Next up, we have the Durham Dragalges. And this is another team that, personally, I absolutely love. You've got the overwhelming, at times, power of King Gambit, surrounded by some very good support mons. You've got Gyarados, who is an absolute staple, no matter the meta. Got Intimidate, T-Wave, Taunt. It's annoying and difficult to remove. It can help chip away at your opponents with Waterfall. It's just an all-around very, very solid Pokemon. Same with Tyranitar. Tyranitar can set up the Sand, which of course being a Steel type, King Gambit's immune to, while itself, T-Tar is also bulky and difficult to remove, especially if you're running the Assault Vest set, which it's also getting special defense boost from the Sand. It too is not a slouch in the damage department. Got Sableye, which is just super annoying to deal with. Sableye is just one of those really, really irritating Pokemon to deal with. I love it. I hate it at the same time. It's an absolute menace. It's a prankster mon with screens, with Taunt, with Encore. It's got Skill Swap. It doesn't output a great deal of damage, which kind of holds it back in my opinion, but it is just a menace. Got Toadscruel, which is one of the most underrated redirection mons out there, mostly because its ability, Mycelium Might, makes it all its status moves move last. So people kind of overlook it, but at the same time, Amoonguss is so slow that outside of Trick Room, all of its status moves are always moving last. So it's much of a muchness. I like Toadscruel. Toadscruel also gets Trick Room. So depending on what you're looking for, Toadscruel is just a really, really solid Pokemon. You got Rotom Heat. All the Rotom forms are kind of Swiss Army knife Pokemon. They do so much. They're bulky enough that they're very rarely going to get one shot by anything. They can output a decent amount of damage. They get a lot of support moves. Rotom Heat gets Wisp, it gets Taunt, it gets Thunder Wave. It's then got access to Heat Wave. It's got Discharge, Thunderbolt. It's a solid all-rounder Pokemon. The Rotoms have fallen off a little bit over the years because they're kind of early gen
Pokemon, so they get power crept a little bit. But if you need a solid utility mon, you can never go wrong by picking up a Rotom. Glade is a very underrated Pokemon, and I think for Draft League, it's a great pickup. Its ability, sharpness, boosts all of its cutting moves, and it gets a lot. Psycho Cutter, Sacred Sword, Aqua Cutter, Leaf Blade. It's just got phenomenal coverage, and they're all boosted by that sharpness. So you can defensive terror it and still not lose a great deal by not offensively terroring into one of the cutting moves that you want to use. Flamigo's cool. I like Flamigo. Fighting Flying is a decent defensive typing. It's fast. It hits kind of hard. The Co-Star ability allows it to copy the stat changes of the partner Pokemon when it comes onto the field. So if you set up on King Gambit, the Sword Stance King Gambit or something like that, bring out Flamigo. Flamigo's going to copy that Sword Stance boost. It's fun. It's gimmicky. I don't normally like gimmicks, but I don't know. The Pink Bird's kind of fun. Arboliva is one that don't have any experience with using. A lot of people say it's an amazing Trick Room sweeper, but I don't see it. When I look at its stats and its coverage, I don't see what a lot of other people see. Yes, its ability means after it's eaten its berry, it's got a 50-50 chance every turn to restore it, but it's still a 50-50 chance. Yes, it's got Leech Seed, it's got Giga Drain, it's going to be hard to remove, and it's probably going to output a decent amount of damage, but I don't see it as this amazing Trick Room sweeper that people see. It's decent. I'm not going to knock it. It's a decent Pokemon, but it's not all that like people make it out to be. It's good, but it's not great. Vigoroth. Now this one I know absolutely nothing about. I've never used it. I've never seen anyone use it. And looking at its stats, there's a reason. I guess in Draft League, where your options are kind of limited and you've got to get creative, it's not a bad pick. It's a decent support. It's got a decent pool of supporting moves with Taunt, T-Wave, Encore, Yawn. It's got After You, but its base speed is 97, so it's not really going to be outspeeding anything. Not like Lilligant with After You. So I can't knock it as a pick because it's a decent support Pokemon. But at the same time, I think there were probably better D-tier picks available at the time. And then we get on to the signature Mon, the logo Mon for the team, Dragalge, and it was there. Alberta couldn't not pick it, really. Poison Dragon type, it's not bad defensive typing. It's a special sweeper with okay coverage and not the best special attack, but also not the worst. It gets Haze. It gets a couple of nice supporting moves. Decent low tier Mon. Nothing bad really to say about it. All in all, I think this is a really solid draft. I like the team. I think it's a good squad, a well-built, well-thought-out squad. So where are we going to rank it? Is it better than the Woobats? I think it probably is. I think this squad's got a very good matchup into mine. Oshawatts. I think just through its sheer versatility and the nuisance that a lot of Alberto's Mons are going to pose to the Oshawatts, I will rank it higher. I think it beats the Gothitelles. I think all three of these teams, the Gothitelles, the Oshawatts, the Dragalges, they've all kind of got good matchups into each other. So it's, as the league goes on, it's going to be exciting to see those three teams go head to head. I think because of that, it's hard to disagree with how you order these three teams. I personally think the Gothitelles beat the Oshawatts. The Oshawatts probably beat the Dragalges, but the Dragalges beat the Gothitelles. So for that reason, I'm going to put the Dragalges above both of them. Next, we are on to Skystrikers and head to Best's squad. This is one that I'm going to have to really try hard to take my personal opinions out and be a lot more objective, because personally I don't rate Hisui and Gudra, and I don't rate Ursaluna. I know a lot of people swear that these two Pokemon are absolutely unbeatable, broken, amazing, but I've never lost to a Hisui and Gudra team, and Ursaluna teams aren't that hard to deal with. I've lost a couple, but I've also won a fair few as well, and that's even playing with my own Trick Room team, which doesn't have Ursaluna on it. So, with my personal thoughts on those two out of the way, let's have a good look at the team. So, we've got Grimmsnarl, we've got Hoodra, kind of standard combination. If you've got a Hisui and Gudra, you're going to pair it with Grimmsnarl. You want that Gudra to not be taking a huge amount of damage as it's trying to set up. Grimmsnarl is kind of underrated in a lot of ways. Yes, it's got those prankster screens that everyone loves so much about it, but it's got a pretty good attack stat as well. It can output some damage, and with Parting Shot to also lower stats of the opposition and pivot the Grimmsnarl out, it's a very, very solid Pokemon. Gudra, we all know what Hisui and Gudra is going to do. It's going to shelter, it's going to body press, it's usually got life dew and leftovers for recovery. There's little variation within the sets. You know what it's going to do. It's up to your opponent to stop it. Ursaluna, it's slow, it's bulky, it puts a ton of damage, but it takes a little bit to get going. It doesn't help you set up Trick Room. Again, it's up to your opponent to stop you. It's not complicated, it's not rocket science, but it's not always easy to do. Next, we have the Sandy Shocks Espathra Core. Gravity with 100% accurate hypnosis. Sandy Shocks is a great Pokemon. I love Sandy Shocks. It looks amazing, and though it doesn't have the greatest amount of coverage, it does have a lot of support and outputs a lot of damage. And it's deceptively fast as well. Stab T-Bolt, Stab Earth Power, they do damage to a lot of things. Espathra is a bit of a tough one for me because it's one that I've always wanted to use, but I've never managed to find a space on a team to run it. With the gravity from Sandy Shocks, it has that 100% accurate hypnosis, so it's going to put stuff to sleep. It has the Trick Room for Ursaluna. It's got two abilities. One in Speed Boost at the end of each full turn. You have to get that in. It gets its speed raised. It gets Opportunist, which if you have a setup Pokemon on your opponent's side of the field, whenever that Pokemon raises a stat, Espathra copies it. So it's got some versatility in how it can be played. It also gets decent coverage, and it's got a fairly decent special attack stat. It's got a bit of bulk to it as well. While it's not the best Trick Room setter, it's also not the worst. And speaking of Trick Room setters, we've got Misdreavus. Now, Misdreavus is Baby Flutter. Obviously not got Fluttermane's stat line, but it does, however, have Fluttermane's move pool. Being a ghost type, it's immune to Fake Out. Slap an Eviolite on it to boost its defenses. EV train it right, it's probably going to live double up, and it's going to get your Trick Room up for you. But it's not going to do much beyond that. So if you're going to put that much investment into using Misdreavus as a Trick Room setter, why not just Covert Cloak Espathra? Persian. Now, Persian, while not quite as good as its Alolan cousin, is still very, very fast Fake Out user. And it still has some good supporting options. Obviously, Fake Out, it's got Taunt, T-Wave, Icy Wind, Snarl. You can kind of build it physical or special. It's got decent coverage. It's not the strongest in the damage department, but it is a good support mon. So, as a low tier pick, it's hard to argue with it. It's a good pickup. Clawitzer too. Clawitzer as a low tier pick, it's a very, very good pickup. Its ability Mega Launcher boosts the power of all pulse moves, and this thing gets all pulse moves. So it's slow, it's kind of bulky, it's got a good special attack stat. As special attack in Trick Room Sweepers go, it's not a bad one with its coverage. Vivian is actually turned out to be one of my favorite Pokemon. It's a bit like a lesser Mousehold. It's got redirection and it's got friend guard. It's not quite as bulky as the mouse, but it does have access to Tailwind. It does have access to Sleep Powder. So it's like a weird hybrid of Jumpluff and Mousehold. It's a good support Pokemon. Now, the last two, the two previous gen starters, these two picks I don't really like. Cinderace, it's a cool looking Pokemon. It's got some decent supporting moves, but it's not really got the best coverage. It's got decent enough stats, but then its two abilities, Blaze, which raise its offensive stats with fire moves, but only when it's at 1/3 or less HP. So if you're going to run Blaze on it, you're probably going to want to sash it. You're going to maximize that damage. You're going to take a hit, go to sash, unleash one really big fire move, and then go down the next turn. Its other ability, Libero, I don't know how you pronounce that. It's a bit like Protean in that it changes its typing to the type of the move it's using once per switching. So you want to run acrobatics. As soon as you click acrobatics, it changes to a flying type, which could be kind of cool. You give this a single use item, you click acrobatics, it transforms into a flying type. You've instantly got 110 base power stab acrobatics. Pretty cool. And then terrestrializing into fire, you keep your stab for acrobatics by having transformed into a flying type, and you regain your stab on fire by terrestrializing. So I could see some uses for it, but I think outside of Draft League at least, and this may be my inexperience with draft showing through, there's things that do its job a lot better. Inside a draft with the limited options, it might be a better pick than I'm giving it credit for. Hisuian Decidueye. It's decently slow to work in Trick Room. It's a grass fighting type, which isn't the best defensively. It does, however, have the ability Scrappy, which means its fighting and normal moves hit Ghost. And with a 112 base attack, it's not bad. Its signature move, Triple Arrows, is absolutely broken. And with Scrappy allowing you to hit Ghost types with it, it's nuts. So it's a 90 base power move. It's got a high crit ratio. Then it's got a 50% chance to lower the target's defense by 1 and a 30% chance to flinch. That is ridiculous. The trouble is, it's on a decidedly average Pokemon, which is good, because if they put that crazy move on a good Pokemon, that Pokemon would be absolutely busted. But I guess in Draft League, Decidueye is probably a better pickup than I'm giving it credit for. It's a decent Pokemon. It's not great. In that C tier, for me, there were better picks. But as a C tier mon, it's not bad. It's not as bad a pickup as Cinderace. Cinderace is a B tier. I think that was a swing and a miss. Decidueye as C tier pick, I maybe would have gone for something like a Charizard or a Bramblegast. I think there were better picks that, looking at it, are still on the board now. It is one of the better C tier Pokemon. Overall, it's not a bad team. I think it's going to struggle against the top teams. I don't think it's got a good matchup into the likes of Oshawatts and the Gothitelles. I think it's probably got a 50-50 matchup into Woobats. I think with the Snow Boost, thanks to Taunt on Tornadus, I think there's enough damage output to be able to deal with Ursaluna, I think it's better than the Latios. The Latios have ways of countering the Ursaluna. They've got ways of countering the Hisui and Gudra. Overall, I think the Skystrikers have got a good matchup into the Latios. So I'm going to put it right in the middle of the pack. Put it one spot below mine. But that is a very 50-50 matchup. So let's move on to Papa Squid and the Indianapolis Mudbrays. This is another team I quite like. Obviously, you've got the 3 Pokemon that jump straight out at you. Dragonite, Volcarona, Annihilate. 3 very, very big offensive threats. Everyone knows what Dragonite does, but what people forget is it's good without Shenpao. It doesn't need Shenpao to deal damage. Annihilate. People see Annihilate without Mouse Hold and they instantly think that it's just going to be a final Gambit Mon. No. Annihilate can just be big, bulky, sit there on the field, deal damage, be hard to remove. It'll click Drain Punch until you've given it enough stacks on Rage Fist, and then it's just going to start one-shotting everything. Volcarona is, for me, one of the most versatile Pokemon in the game. It can sit there, be bulky, redirect. It's got Flame Body, so every time it gets hit, it's got a chance to burn. Or you can build it as a straight-up fast damage dealer, clicking Fiery Dance, clicking Heat Wave, just setting things on fire. Or you can make it bulky, set up with Quiver Dance, Fiery Dance, Giga Drain, and just have it sit there on the field being really, really annoying. Then you've got Raichu. Like it's a Alolan version, it is just an incredibly fast fake-out user. It's got the ability Static, which means that anytime it's hit with a contact move, there's 30% chance Pokemon making contact will be paralyzed. That can be really annoying to deal with. It's also got the ability Lightning Rod. Anytime a Pokemon uses an electric move, it gets drawn into Raichu, and Raichu raises its special attack by 1 without taking any damage. So it's a really good defensive pivot. It doesn't have the highest offensive stats. It doesn't have the greatest coverage, but it can deal a bit of damage. It can sit there, zap things with Thunderbolt, and just generally be a nuisance. Next up, we have Serena. Serena has this very interesting ability, Queenly Majesty, which stops the opposition using priority, just like Farigiraf. And just like Farigiraf, Serena works very, very well in Trick Room. Serena's got decent damage output. It's got lots of coverage. It's got a decent base attack stat. It doesn't have the greatest amount of support, but you set up Trick Room, you hard swap out your Trick Room sweeper for Serena the next turn. Doesn't need to have the support. I kind of like that pick. Slowbro. Now, Slowbro was a bit of a odd pick when it first came up, but now seeing the team in its entirety, it kind of makes sense. It's a decent Trick Room setter. It's got some good supporting moves. Icy Wind, T-Wave, Trick. It isn't a one-trick pony and just setting up Trick Room. It's got some decent coverage. The trouble with it really is that it doesn't output as much damage as you like, but it does have Regenerated, so you can have it set up Trick Room, soak up some hits, pivot out, and then come back in later to help out your Trick Room sweeper. So in that regard, it's not a bad pick at all. Stonjourner. This pick honestly feels like I can't get Shenpao. What else can I put next to Dragonite to make it do more damage? So Stonjourner, for those of you that don't know, has an ability that makes its teammates' moves do 1.3 times damage. The trouble is that Stonjourner itself doesn't really do a lot of damage. It's got 0 coverage. It's pure rock type, so it just basically sits there throwing stones. It's very bulky on the defensive side with absolutely no special defense whatsoever. People have made it work, so as much as I doubt it and I don't like it, people have top cut regionals with Stonjourner, so it can't be all that bad. There's obviously ways of making this Pokemon work. Honchkrow, or as I like to call it, bigger but worse Murkrow. So Honchkrow is essentially a lower Murkrow without Prankster. So it's still got Tailwind, it's still got Haze, it's still got all those awesome supporting moves that Murkrow has. It's still got a decent attack stat. So as a Tailwind setter in draft, it's not a bad pick at all. It's bulky, it's going to live a couple of hits, set up your Tailwind, deal a little bit of damage. Outside of draft, terrible Pokemon. Inside of draft, not a bad pick. Florges. Florges is a decent Trick Room Sweeper, pure Fairy type, so it's got Stab, Draining Kiss, which is going to make it tough to get off the field. It also gets access to Giga Drain, which deals a bit more damage than Draining Kiss, so you can Terror into Grass, Giga Drain, and it's going to be very, very annoying, especially if you put it in Trick Room next to an Annihilate, next to a bulky Dragonite. It's going to sit there, be annoying, chip away at your Pokemon while healing itself. As a lower tier pick, it's not bad. It's not bad at all. Umbreon. Don't like the Umbreon pick. Umbreon's a cool looking Pokemon. It's got one of the nicest shinies in the game, but in actual Pokemon battles, it's terrible. It's bulky, it's got some decent support moves, but deals no damage whatsoever. It's going to set up screens, Snarl, Taunt, Yawn, and die. It's got Foul Play, so it doesn't have to use its own attacking stats, but I just think there were better picks there. Dugtrio, I'm sure, was just a meme pick. It's fast, it's got access to Earthquake, it traps things in. Unlike Gothitelles' trapping ability, Dugtrio's traps anything that's not airborne. So Ghost types can still get trapped by Dugtrio. What doesn't get trapped are Flying Mons and Levitate Mons, which really kind of makes it worse than Gothitelles' trap. But it's going to be fun to see it get used. It's not great, but it's going to be fun. I hope the Squid finds a way to make this work, and I can't wait to see replays of it. Overall, where are we going to rank this? How does it compare to Skystrikers? I think it's better than Skystrikers. I think having the priority with Dragonite, having the setup with Volcarona, Annihilate was a very bad matchup for Hisui and Goodra. I think the Mudbrays beat the Skystrikers, but I'm not sure if this beats the Woobats. I think this trio of Woobats, Mudbrays, Skystrikers is a bit like that trio of the Dragalges, Gothitelles, Oshawatts. All three teams are of a similar power level, similar strategies. They can all beat each other, basically. Next up, we have the Denver Darkrais and Tommy. This is definitely an underrated team. You got Landorus doing Landorus things. It intimidates, it earthquakes, rock slides, it deals shitloads of damage. You've got Pelipper setting up the rain, being bulky and annoying, getting Tailwind up, clicking Hurricane. Palmart, again, is annoying. It can fake out Encore, T-Wave, Revival Blessing to bring back the Landorus, the Pelipper. Palmart also gets every single elemental punching move in the game. You've got Articuno, which can set up screens, can set up Tailwind. If the snow is up, it's got that really annoying ability, increases its evasion. So 100% accurate moves become 90% accurate moves, essentially, give or take. Normal Slowking, which I personally think is better than Galarian Snowking, with Chilly Reception to set up snow for Articuno. Snowking's also got Trick Room, Taunt, Yawn, Icy Wind. It's not got the greatest of coverage. It's essentially just got water, ice, and psychic moves. But it also has Regenerate, so it switches out with Chilly Reception. It gains a third of its HP back. Palafin, who loves the rain, and because it's on a rain team, you can defensively terror it. We all know what Palafin does. It's a bit of a free turn for your opponent when you lead Palafin, but when it comes back out, it does deal ridiculous amounts of damage. Overquill, which is another Pokemon that loves being in the rain. It's got Swift Swim. It's got a ton of poison moves. It's going to come in, be fast, poison everything. Magnezone I think is very underrated. It's steel and electric, so it's got good typing. It checks quite a lot of things as a defensive pivot. It deals a decent amount of damage. It's not going to come in and just completely sweep the game, but as a defensive pivot, it deals respectable damage. It doesn't have much coverage, so it does just really have Flash Cannon, Thunderbolt, your typical electric type moves, but it can come in, it can set up screens. Spiritomb is another one that I think is underrated. It's great as a Trick Room setter. It's also great as an imprisoned Trick Room mon. It's immune to Prankster Taunt because it's Dark type. It's also immune to Fake Out because it's a Ghost type. So unless you can kill it, it's going to imprison the Trick Room. It's got Wisp, it's got Taunt, it's got Ally Switch, which is really annoying. It gets Icy Wind. Beyond its Ghost and Dark type stabs, it's only really got Psychic coverage, but with its support moves, it only needs a really good stab. Lucario. I love Lucario. If you haven't already, go check out the first 3 videos I posted on the channel where I'm laddering in game in Regulation C with Lucario. Lucario is a very, very fun Pokemon to use. It's not the best. It's very average, but as a C tier pick, I think it's a good one. It gets a lot of priority moves, so you can build it entirely with priority, which stops you from having to invest in its speed stat at all. So you can just give it a ton of HP, give it a ton of attack, little bit of special attack to make that priority vacuum wave a bit stronger. Flareon, to me, is kind of the odd one out. It's a decent fire pivot because it's got Flash Fire. It gets access to Wisp, Yawn. You can swap it in, get a Flash Fire proc, click Stab Flamethrowers, which are now boosted by that Flash Fire proc. It's not a bad pickup. I think it was probably better on the board at the time. Now, where do we rank this? I don't think this is a great squad. Landorus is a very, very good pick, but a bit like Latios, they got a very, very good first pick and then didn't really put a great supporting cast around it. So Pelipper's good. Pelipper with Palafin is good, but Pelipper, Palafin, Overquill, Landorus, not entirely sure that's a great 4. Same with Slowbro, Articuno. Articuno doesn't really do a great deal of damage, so having Landorus on a Trick Room team is not that good. So the Trick Room mode kind of feels a bit hard to work with. So with that in mind, is it better than the Latios? No, it definitely is not better than the Latios. Is it better than the Latias? I'm sorry, Tommy. Think the Denver Darkrais are headed to the bottom. Next on the list we have Shim and the Golden Gate Gholdengos. My week 1 opponents. This is going to be a fun battle. This is a very, very good team, and I'm going to struggle against this. So if we ignore the 2 very obvious outliers in Fungus and Gothitelle, you have a core of Shempao, Dragapult, Kilowattrel, which give you incredible offense, good speed control, and then you can switch in Masquerain as an intimidator. Masquerain also gets Tailwind, it gets Sticky Webs, gets Haze, Foul Play. It's got a lot of coverage. It doesn't do an amazing amount of damage, but it is going to sit there and be really, really annoying. Or they can go screens and bring in Klefki with Prankster Screens, Prankster T-Wave. Klefki also gets Weathers if they want to play Weather Wars. Bring in Scizor with Technician, also Tailwind. a bunch of flying and fighting coverage. This is an all-around very, very strong team. The only 3 mons on here that I think don't really belong would be Colossal, Fungus, and Gothitelles. Fungus and Gothitelles will, as I said earlier on in the video, I'm not a huge fan of picking the pre-evolutions. They don't have the stats, and these ones in particular, they're not going to make great use of Eviolite. Colossal is a bit of a gimmick mon. I think it'll work pretty well in Trick Room as a Trick Room sweeper, not trying to activate its steam engine ability. I think it'll work really, really well, and it'll take a few people by surprise. But trying to hit it with a surf from a special sweeper Dragonite or a stab Aquajet from Azumarill, I don't think it's a good idea. People pair it with a surf Bruxish or a Aquajet from Bruxish because Bruxish doesn't really deal a great deal of damage, and Bruxish just basically sits there preventing priority. We haven't even begun to talk about Iron Valiant, who of all of the Paradox mons is probably my favorite. It just looks so cool, and it's incredibly versatile. It gets Wide Guard, it gets Encore, Disable, Taunt, T-Wave, Icy Wind, Skill Swap. It can be physical, it can be special. It's got incredible coverage. Its problem is it's a jack of all trades, master of absolutely nothing. But it can take you by surprise with how much damage it can deal on the special side or on the physical side. And it's one of the only Pokemon that get Imprison Wide Guard. So coming up, when Shim comes up against the Pelipper team, it can lead Valiant, click Imprison Wide Guard on Pelipper. When Shim comes up against Oshawatts, he can lead Iron Valiant into Indeedee Armarouge, click Imprison. It's now imprisoned Trick Room and Wide Guard. This is just all around a very, very well put together team, and is going to be a major, major problem. It is a bit on the frail side, so you're going to have to try and outspeed the Dragapult, outspeed the Shenpao, try and take out the Kilowattrel before it can get Tailwind set up. Then I think you'll be in a good position against these guys. That's no easy task. Now, how do we think this stacks up against the top? I think it's definitely better than my team. I'm leaning towards putting it straight in at number 1. So at the moment, number 1, we've got the Blazing Brelooms. So I think it's a very close matchup between these two teams. Is Triple G better than Double B? I'm not sure it is. I think it's close. I think it's very, very close call. I think the Trick Room mode on Brelooms is better. I think I'd take Shenpao Dragapult over Urshifu. Haxorus, I guess. Yeah. I think Golden Gate Gholdengos have just taken over top spot. Now, Pikachu's Down Under Drop Bears. This is a cool team. Thundurus, Enamorus, very good pairing. Enamorus is a very, very good special sweeper. Its ability, contrary, means that instead of having its stats lowered, it gets them raised. Instead of having its stats raised, it gets them lowered. So you lead Enamorus, Thundurus, you Eerie Impulse into Enamorus. Instead of Enamorus' special attack being lowered by 2, it's raised by 2. Enamorus also gets Tailwind, so while you're setting that Eerie Impulse up, you can Tailwind with Enamorus to make it faster next turn. All of a sudden you've got a +2 Enamorus firing off Dazzling Gleams, Moonblasts, absolutely wrecking the joint. And because it's flying, type, you can also put Garchomp next to it, firing off earthquakes. The trouble is, outside of those three, this isn't a great team. That core of three is really cool, and I like it a lot. The trouble is, Zoroark's cool tech. It's going to be a bit of fun. It's going to cause problems. You're going to have to respect it on the team preview. Then you've got Azulf. I like the Lake Trio. I think the Lake Trio are cool. They offer a lot of support. The list of supporting moves that these three Pokemon get is absolutely insane. And they get an amazing amount of coverage as well. Azulf is the more offensive of the three, but it's still not amazing. It's great in singles, not so much in doubles. Syrian Typhlosion is basically just an eruption bot. It doesn't really do anything other than that. It's got Frisk, which, as we're playing closed team sheets, it's open terror, but we're not revealing items, moves, all that stuff. It's useful for that, but that's just it. Alolan Persian, I've mentioned this a couple of times. It's the fastest. It's Alolan Persian, I've mentioned it a couple of times, is a super fast fake out user. It also gets quite a lot of support moves. Taunt, T-Wave, Icy Wind, Quash, Faint. It also gets Parting Shot, which is nice. It's more a special attacker than a physical attacker, but for some reason its physical coverage is better than its special coverage. I don't understand. It can be either, but stats wise it leans more towards special. Quagsire it's kind of just a worse Gastrodon. It gets Icy Wind, it gets Eerie Impulse, so it can be put next to Enamorus to activate Enamorus. It's got water absorbability, which means it's completely immune to water moves and gets healed by them. But it doesn't have particularly high offensive stats, and support-wise, it's only really got Yawn and Icy Wind. Chestnut's just garbage. I don't know what else to say about Chestnut. Its stats are terrible. It's got ridiculously high defense. Beyond that, it doesn't really do a great deal. Revavroom is a cool Pokemon. I've seen it used to great effect. I've also seen it fail miserably. It doesn't have any real coverage, and it needs to set up to get going. If you position it correctly to where it can use its shift gears, it can get those stat boosts and it can start popping off. It's a good low tier gamble pick, but I'm not sure it was better than others that were on the board at the time. Titan, on the other hand, Titan is a very, very good Pokemon. Sheer Force, Life Orb boosted Icicle Crash is insane. If you can get Snow set up, it's also got Slush Rush, and Slush Rush plus Earthquake is dumb. It's dumb damage. This is a dumb Pokemon, and I love it. But all that being said, where do we think this ranks? Is it better than the Latios? I certainly don't think it's as good as Woobats, Mudbrays, or Skystrikers. So I think it can compete with the Latios. I don't think it's better though. How about the Latias? That's a close one. I think that's a tough choice between those two. I think the Latias probably win that though. I think they've just got too much offense. I think the Latias have got that. Denver Darkrais. Let's compare to those. I think this is more like it. This is a very, very tight matchup. I think as a squad though, I think the Darkrais have got it. So, sorry Pikachu, just hit the bottom. Now we're on to the Newcastle Nidokings, coached by Jamion. This team is kind of hard to rank and to judge because at first glance it seems like there isn't a lot of synergy here. Roaring Moon as a first pick is great. Roaring Moon is a really, really good Pokemon. You can do booster acrobatics, but it also gets tailwind, so it's got utility as well. You could do booster energy into speed, run acrobatics, throat chop, tailwind, protect, and you've got a really solid Roaring Moon set. It's a little on the frail side, so you do have to be careful with positioning it, but overall really solid Pokemon. And you compare that with Ceruledge, who with Flash Fire, Grass Terror, Bitter Blade, you're going to deal decent chunk of damage and heal yourself at the same time. Ceruledge just has this nasty habit of just sticking around on the field for longer than anybody wants it to. Then you got a really good solid Trick Room core with Hatterene and Bronzong. Bronzong is just so difficult to remove. It's such a good Trick Room setter. And Hatterene's the classic special attacking Trick Room sweeper for a reason. It's just a solid Pokemon. Then you've got Altaria, who can be your bulky Tailwind setter. It doesn't do a lot of damage, but it's got Haze, it's got Wisp, it's got Tailwind. It can do a solid job for you. Just don't expect it to get any big KOs. Hisuian Electrode is, in my opinion, kind of underrated. It's one of the fastest, in fact, it's the fastest Pokemon not named Regieleki. And it's not got the best offensive stats. I know it's not got the best coverage, but Taunt, T-Wave, Foul Play, it's going to offer you some good utility. It's fast. It can be your speed control. If your opposition have only got like 1 or 2 fast mons, you can forgo the Tailwind and just use Electro to get off those Thunder Waves to slow the opposition down. If you build it special attack, you can put it next to Chi-Yu and get some decent output from it. Chi-Yu is just Chi-Yu. It does Chi-Yu things. Crazy Little Firefish is always going to be a menace, and it's always going to be one of the best Pokemon in the game. And having Chi-Yu, you can use Chi-Yu to enable Greninja to do a bit more damage. It's got a lot of coverage. It's a pretty good special attacker. It's got Haze, it's got Taunt, Icy Wind. If you don't want to run it with Protean, you can use role play to copy an opponent's ability or your own teammate's ability. Then you got Ursaring. Ursaring, it's got guts, quite literally. It's slow. It can be a good physical Trick Room sweeper paired with Bronzong, Hatterene. It's got really good coverage. It also gets Yawn. So you can Eviolite it and self-wisp it. And you've got a good Trick Room sweeper with good coverage, good attack stats, boosted by a self-wisp. It just works. Primeape. Primeape is a weird one because it's kind of been forgotten about. And it's been around for a long time. It's faster than Annihilate. It doesn't quite have the attack stat of Annihilate or the defenses of Annihilate, but it's still a solid Pokemon. It's got a lot of coverage moves. It just doesn't have Annihilate's Rage Fist broken busted ability. All in all, this is a pretty solid team. Where would we rank it? I don't think it's up there with Mudbrays, Skystrikers or Woobats. I don't, despite it being similar in a lot of ways to the Latios, in that it's got a couple of very strong Pokemon, but seemingly no team synergy. I don't think it's as good as the Latios. Now, I think the Drop Bears have got a better core of 3 or 4 than the Nidokings. But beyond that, it's worse. So I think the Nidokings go above the Drop Bears. I think the team as a whole is more solid for the Darkrais than the Nidokings. They're they're pretty even. The top tier Pokemon for the Nidokings are better than the top tier Pokemon for Denver. But I think the lower tier picks from the Darkrais are better than the lower tier picks from the Nidokings. So with that, I think Nidokings go second from bottom. And lastly, we have Space CP and the Sandaconda Squad. This is actually, I think, the first time looking at this team properly. This team is hard to evaluate because it looks like a fairly random collection of Pokemon. But when you start digging into it, Basculegion can operate either under Tailwind or under Trick Room. It's only got 78 base speed, which under Trick Room is absolutely fine. Thanks to Articuno, you can run it in the rain with Swift Swim, so its 78 base speed suddenly becomes 156. But Articuno also gets Tailwind, so Rain Dance, Tailwind, Basculegion is now the fastest thing on the field, and it's hitting like a truck. You've got Hisuian Arcanine for Intimidate. Then you've got that always hard to deal with Grafaiai Slacking combination, with Grafaiai using Doodle to overwrite Slacking's Truant ability. For the Trick Room mode, which you can set up with either Galarian Articuno or Carbink, you've got Blatrier, which in my opinion is probably one of the best Trick Room sweepers we have in the game right now. The others, Venomoth isn't great, but it has Shield Dust, which means it can't be faked out. It's completely immune to the secondary effects of any move. And then it's got Sleep Powder, Rage Powder. You can make it bulky redirection. It's a solid low tier pickup. Electros is a strange one. It's got rain, it's got sun, it's got electric terrain, it's got eerie impulse, thunder wave. It's got lots and lots of coverage. It just doesn't have the stat line to go with it. Again, it's slow, so you can run it in Trick Room. And to be honest, most of this team seems like it's geared towards Trick Room. It's got the rain offense mode with Swift Swim, Basculegion, Hisuian Arcanine and Galarian Articuno, with perhaps Venomoth for redirection. Most of the team is very Trick Room oriented. Phalanx, again, slow, Trick Room mon. Pure fighting type doesn't really do it for me, to be honest with you. It's got base 100 attack, which means it's not completely useless, but I don't see that Pokemon being brought to many games. Sandaconda's a funny one because it's another one that I've seen used a lot by people. It's got a really, really high defense, so you can do the whole iron defense body press shenanigans with it. It also gets Coil, which raises its attack, defense, and accuracy by 1. That being said, compare this to the drop bear. This is a tough call. I think they're fairly equal. So I actually think overall, I prefer Sandaconda Squad over the Down Under Drop Bears, even though I don't like putting a team containing my boy Garchomp at the bottom. But so, thank you all for watching. Those are my post-draft power rankings for the Regal Draft League. Remember, this is just my opinion. Everyone looks at Pokemon differently. Everyone evaluates a team differently. So I'm sorry if I've ranked your team too low, or if I didn't understand why you picked a certain Pokemon. It's just the way I look at the game. I've tried my best to be as fair and impartial as possible. I know some people are going to say that I've ranked my team way too high, and I probably have, to be fair. Thank you all for watching. Good night.